He did not mean to do it. That is the part everyone keeps repeating, as if intent is the variable that matters. When you have just erased your mother's death, rewritten the cellular history of every person on Earth, and collapsed a war between Aquaman and Wonder Woman that you personally caused by existing in a moment that was not yours to occupy. Notice how intent masks the devastation. Barry Allen did not mean to do it. He just did it anyway. This is where the paradigm shifts, and that is the structural question this video is actually about. Not whether the Flash is a good person, not whether his grief was valid. The question is this: what does it mean for an entire multiverse when the man with the most unilateral power in it also has the least institutional accountability? Now watch what that does to the architecture. Because when you can outrun causality itself, your intentions stop being the relevant factor. Your mood is. The DC Universe was built around a specific stabilizing myth. Heroes have power, but they do not use it to rewrite outcomes. They operate within time. They accept loss. They contain themselves. This myth was never about morality. It was about architecture. And architecture cannot survive bending. The Justice League functions because its members operate on a shared assumption that certain lines exist not because crossing them is impossible, but because crossing them would destabilize every system built downstream. Superman does not rule, Batman does not kill, and the Flash does not go back. Those are not just personal codes, they are load-bearing walls. This is the invisible contract of heroism. The entire structure of meta-human legitimacy in the DC Universe depends on powered individuals accepting artificial restraints. The public tolerates the existence of gods among them because those gods have agreed to be limited, not by law, not by force, by mythology, by the story they collectively agree to perform. Barry Allen was one of the most important performers in that story. The fastest man alive who chose to stay in the present, who ran toward danger instead of away from it through time. That restraint was the point. That restraint was the entire argument for why a man who can breach the time barrier should be trusted with it. And then his mother died. And then it cracked.
Flashpoint is not a villain's plan. It is not an accident in the traditional sense. It is something structurally stranger than either of those things. It is a structural collapse driven by grief. It is what happens when a hero with godlike capability encounters personal grief and discovers that the mythology he was performing was optional. Barry runs back, he saves his mother, and the timeline does not simply shift, it shatters into a version of itself that generates a world war, kills millions, and fundamentally proves that the entire architecture of human civilization in the DC Universe is downstream of one man's emotional state on a given Tuesday. That is not a mistake. That is a demonstration of structural fragility that can never be fully undisclosed. The illusion of safety fractures here. The counter-argument is obvious and it has been made before. Barry corrected it. He went back again, accepted the loss, restored the timeline. He showed remorse. He demonstrated growth. Does that not prove the system works? No, it proves the opposite. The system did not hold because institutional safeguards. It did not hold because the Justice League intervened. It did not hold because any external accountability structure activated. It held because Barry Allen personally decided to feel bad about what he had done and personally chose to fix it. The entire timeline restoration is not a story about checks and balances working. It is a story about how close everything came to permanent collapse because one individual had both the power to cause it and the sole authority to address it. That is not stability. That is luck wearing the costume of virtue. And luck is a terrible foundation for reality.
Every civilization Barry's timeline touches is one emotional crisis away from reorganization. Every war that never happened, every person who exists because a certain sequence of events remained intact, every institution that functions because history arrived in the correct order, all of it is contingent on Barry Allen's current relationship with his own grief. That is the fracture, not the act, the architecture it revealed.
Barry's specific psychological profile makes this structurally worse, not better. He is not reckless, he is not cruel. He is, by any conventional measure, a deeply conscientious person. He cares about consequences. He carries guilt with unusual weight. He is exactly the kind of person you would trust with extraordinary power in an ordinary situation. The problem is that his most dangerous trait is not his darkness, it is his love. Love is an uncontainable variable. Moral absolutists who operate from fear are in some ways more predictable. You can model their behavior. You can anticipate when pride or ideology will drive them to a line and calculate the probability they cross it. Barry's trigger is grief, specifically grief about people he could not save. Grief does not follow ideology. It does not respond to rational frameworks. It surfaces on its own schedule, in its own intensity. And it hits hardest at the moments when a person is most isolated from the social structures that would otherwise regulate their behavior. Barry runs alone. The Speed Force is a singular experience. The faster he moves, the more he leaves behind, including the communal friction that keeps most people from acting on their worst impulses. He is completely isolated from systemic friction. He has already proven that when grief overwhelms his rational restraint, he acts first and calculates consequences second. That is not a character flaw to be corrected through development. It is a documented behavioral pattern attached to a man who can unmake history, and he has not resolved the underlying loss. He never fully can. His mother is still dead in the corrected timeline. The wound is still there. The capability is still there. The conditions for a second Flashpoint exist as a structural permanent state. After Flashpoint, the DC Universe adapted. The timeline that emerged, the New 52 continuity, was not simply a restoration. It was a reorganized architecture that bore the scars of what Barry had done. Characters lost histories. Relationships that had taken decades to build were erased or altered. Entire narrative lineages were restructured. The surface reading is that Barry fixed it. The structural reality is much darker. The structural reading is that he replaced one version of reality with a different one and called it restoration. The heroes who existed before Flashpoint and the heroes who existed after it are not the same people in a continuous story. They are inhabitants of a timeline Barry constructed on the return trip. His remorse shaped the outcome. His choices in the moment of correction determined what survived and what did not. That means Barry Allen is not just capable of destroying timelines, he is capable of building them, of deciding, consciously or not, what version of history is acceptable before moving forward. He became the sole architect of reality. The Justice League did not easily, but the structural possibility exists. The mythology of his restraint has institutional backup in the form of kryptonite, the League, public accountability. Barry's restraint has none of that. He is too fast to intercept before a decision is made. The Speed Force is not accessible to oversight bodies. His emotional triggers are internal, not broadcast. The only mechanism preventing a second Flashpoint is Barry Allen's ongoing willingness to not cause one. That is not an institution. That is a disposition. And dispositions change. This is the definition of structural vulnerability.
This analysis keeps circling without fully answering because it does not fully resolve. Was Barry Allen always this dangerous, or did Flashpoint create the danger? The obvious answer is that the capability existed before the event. The Speed Force does not care about moral development. The potential to breach the time barrier and rewrite causality was present from the moment Barry first tapped into it. But the more uncomfortable answer is that Flashpoint did not create the danger. It revealed that the entire heroic architecture of the DC universe was always contingent on the emotional stability of its most powerful actors. The entire system was always fragile. Barry is not uniquely fragile. He is uniquely capable of expressing fragility at a scale that becomes everyone's problem. Every member of the Justice League has trauma. Every one of them has a moment where the mythology of restraint has bent toward breaking. Barry is simply the one whose break had enough velocity to rewrite history before anyone could intervene. So is Barry Allen a villain? That is the wrong question. The right question is, what does it say about a universe that the line between its most beloved hero and its most structurally destabilizing threat is not capability, not intent, not ideology, but timing? It all comes down to a moment of weakness. He ran back on a Tuesday. If it had been a different Tuesday, with a different level of grief, with a different calculation made in a fraction of a second at the edge of the time barrier, the correction might not have happened. The multiverse is not maintained by heroes. It is maintained by the hope that heroes will continue to make the same choice they made last time. That is not stability. That is deferred collapse.
Barry Allen will run again. He will save someone. He will be called a hero, and that designation will be accurate. None of that changes what Flashpoint structurally proved. The multiverse does not have a guardian with limits. It has a guardian with feelings, and feelings are not architecture. They are weather.